Welcome, everybody. Today I'm joined by a very special guest, Mike Casey, jazz musician extraordinaire. We've been working on this for a while, and I'm just really excited to finally get to sit down with him and have a nice little talk. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for taking time out of your day and your busy schedule to talk with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dario. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm glad we were able to make this happen.
Yep. And so we'll just get right into it since we don't have you for too long. You recently dropped your studio debut called Law of Attraction, and I guess we're just gonna have a kind of short conversation about how things have been going with it, kind of the process leading into it, and everything.
Sure. It's been great so far. The album's been supported far and wide, so I'm really happy with the reception, and it feels great to finally release it because the journey began years ago, really, and it was recorded in July 2018, so it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, that is a long time working on one project, but I'm sure it feels really good to get your debut project, kind of your full vision out there for the whole world to see.
Absolutely does, yeah. I've been meaning to release a studio album for a while after 2 live albums and a remix album of the live albums.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it feels great to finally have presented this to the world.
Yeah, and I guess one of my first questions was kind of the response. You answered that. You said that you've been really happy with the response so far. And I guess I kind of wanted to go into was there any sort of theme, or what was your thinking going into creating this cohesive project? Like, what was your goals with the music particularly?
Sure. So at that time in my life, I was getting ready to actually go abroad for a year. I I had gotten into a year-long master's program with Berklee College of Music at their Valencia, Spain program, and it ended up being an amazing year, and that's actually where I made the remixes. But at that time, I was really feeling like things were starting to gel at a high level with my band, and it had been coming up on over 2 years at that point since we had last recorded anything, because my first 2 albums, which were released in 2017 and 18, were recorded live at a show in 2016. And we had just grown a lot since then, and I'd grown a lot, and I wanted to make sure that I documented the chemistry we'd been developing before I went away for a year, because I knew that music reflects life, and what was about to happen to me was going to be a massive change for the better. But still, I was really happy with where things were right at that moment, and I'm really glad we were able to squeeze in 2 days in the studio right between a couple gigs we did, which is like the best time to get in there, because especially when you're touring and in the jazz world, like just being in shape on your instrument and feeling there's a certain connection in the air that you really are going after. And of course you can go into the studio cold, but it's not as good as if you are coming off a few gigs and the vibe is high, as we might say.
Yeah, it's kind of like sports. Like, you need those reps. You need to be in rhythm.
Exactly. And nothing, there's jazz musicians like to say there's gig chops and there's shed chops, and shed chops is like the shed we call is the practice room. We say the shed, because Charlie Parker used to say he would go into the woodshed to practice. So usually when a lot of guys go into the studio in jazz, because of how the way the jazz world works, it's not always that common to be doing creative gigs, I should say, like with your own original music constantly. And timing it around when you are doing a creative gig is really helpful, because then you can kind of have both sides going for you, and you feel confident going into the studio, like your shed chops are there and your gig chops are there.
Yeah. So most of this was recorded before you took the trip to Spain?
It was all recorded before I took the trip to Spain. The songs were written anywhere from 1 month to several years before the recording session, though. So a song like Shift was actually written probably 2014, 2015 time, back when I was living in Hartford, Connecticut, and the band and I were all living in like the same neighborhood in this tiny city. And it just takes a few tries in the studio to get something, and we've been trying to get a take of Shift for a while, and every live show we recorded it, that song was eluding us. So it
Mm,
took several years to finally document that one,
okay.
for example.
And it's also like a visual album, so you have I think a music video for every single track. It's basically you guys performing it live, and the intensity, you can see everything, you can really feel the music, and I think it really brings alive the music in a way that just listening to it doesn't. Was that intentional?
Thanks. Yeah, it was exactly what I was going for. I've always felt like, there's in my music at least, I didn't want there to be that much of a difference between how I approach playing in the studio and playing live in certain aspects. And of course, certain aspects should be different. I mean, actually, one of the things I learned at Berkeley, spending a lot of time in the studio, is that uh, it can save you a lot of time and headache later if you have certain mindset and goals going into the studio versus just showing up and hitting as if it's a gig. But I still like to keep a live element as much as possible in my music. So there's no isolation, as you can see in the videos. We
Yeah,
don't even have headphones. I mean,
yeah,
it's like very low tech. There's no studio tricks, and spontaneity really is the thing. A lot of people try to define what jazz is and isn't, and that's a whole rabbit hole. But to me, one of the most important things that makes something jazz or not to me is the level of group communication happening at lightning speed constantly. That's to me like the spontaneity, the live part, that you can't rehearse,
yeah,
because you have improvisation in other styles of music, like blues has improvisation, jam band stuff has improvisation, flamenco even has improvisation, but it's not really the same as the way we do it in jazz music. And that's because of the amount and the level of group communication, the risk taking, and that's something that I always want to preserve in my music. I don't, unless it's electronic. If it's an acoustic thing, I want it to be less produced in a certain way and just
yeah.
more like we're just feeling and we're all jumping off the cliff together.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it definitely comes through in the videos. Like, it definitely felt raw and intense. Like, you really felt like I said, you can really feel the music in a way that you just don't necessarily get just from listening to it. And I think another thing I noticed is the specific covers that you chose. Daniel Caesar's popped up a couple times, and then there's also like a Jay-Z and Kanye um, version of No Church in the Wild. And I guess my question was, why those specific covers, and was there any specific way that you chose to approach them?
Sure, sure. So, No Church in the Wild is a song that is long one of my favorites. I'll never forget the first time hearing it on the radio when I was probably a senior in high school, and just got like goosebumps everywhere. I just thought, wow, like that's a song that one day I wanna do my own version of. And finally got it together many years later. I always felt like that song had a certain, it almost had like a certain intensity in it that was simmering.
Yeah,
And in
yeah,
the original version, the simmer is cool, and the simmer is very like, it's intense, but it's not really climaxing, it's like bubbling, right?
yeah. It always
And
feels like it's just building up the entire time.
exactly, but it never really climaxes. And I wanted to make a version that, like, I thought to myself, like, if I'm gonna do a version of No Church in the Wild, I need to kind of top that as far as intensity level. So I structured the arrangement in a way where we still have the bubbling and the building the entire time, but it we try to take it further. So you might notice there's actually two intros, which is kind of rare. And they're so long that I had to like cut it up into like intro and radio edit, and like the radio edit still has its own intro. um so I set up that intro to have it be like a really big grand opening, really intense, really powerful, and then break it down and build it back up. And there's all these parts in the song where we're breaking it down, building it back up, breaking it down, building it back up. But each time we do that, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Mm,
And I feel like the climax is really at the very end, where I'm actually playing Kanye's sung uh, part in the song as
yeah,
like an outro. Um, so yeah, that's a little bit about No Church in the Wild. And for the Daniel Caesar ones, that was a little bit more recent. I let me think, Freudian probably dropped 2017 around that. And
Yeah, somewhere around there.
right around, yeah, something like that. And right around then I was going through a lot in my life, and that album brought me so much comfort and solace and peace, and it still does. And I just, I just thought to myself, this is some of the greatest songwriting of my generation that I've ever heard. So I thought, I'm going to do what jazz musicians have always done, is, reinterpret the popular music of substance that is of their time. And I just thought, these two songs really spoke to me, and I wanted to twist them around in my own way and do something a little different with each of them. And hopefully I'll do more Daniel Caesar in the future. There's a few melodies, a bunch of his melodies sit really well on the saxophone. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that was my question. I was like, is there something particular about his music that lends itself to jazz interpretation?
I would say there is. And it's funny that having something transfer well to the saxophone is like the first filter I go through when I'm searching for songs to reimagine, because a lot of popular music today, unfortunately, it's just too pentatonic, or not melodic enough to really transfer. And what I mean is, people might find a catchy melody, and without thinking about it, they're like, yeah, I enjoy it. That's a good melody. But if you take the words away, there's actually not much there. And it would kind of sound stupid if someone just played it on a saxophone, if it's three notes over and over.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, it's also not specific enough. Like, there are so many songs that are just the same 4 or 5 notes in a similar fashion, right? So it's about finding songs where the melody without the words is specific. It's specific enough where if you play it on a saxophone, people would recognize it.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, most people, even I don't like necessarily think about it, but even like particularly in like hip hop, where hip hop is now, a lot of the melodies, like you pointed out, they come from, the actual artists themselves, and like the singing and the word choices and the way that they present it vocally. And then I guess when you do take that apart, the what's underlying is pretty simple and like unrecognizable.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something that has been, there's definitely a challenge when searching for songs to like reimagine, because if I do, I know I've been on gigs before where people will come up to me and ask me like, hey, can you play like Rack City or something? And it's like, that's 2 notes. It's like, if I play Rack City on the saxophone, you're not going to know it's Rack City. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That sort of thing. So it's definitely key to find those what I call golden melodies. And I think it's a lot of it just comes down to like a certain standard of songwriting where, I like to think of like Stevie Wonder is a great example of this. Like, any Stevie Wonder song, they're all so strong, just the song, compositionally speaking, that you can, it's instantly recognizable. But more than that, you can take it in a ton of different contexts. You can play it instrumentally and it'll still sound great, and you'll know which song you're playing. You can play it in a bossa nova feel. You could play it in a rock feel. You could just switch it up an endless amount of ways, and you'll both still recognize it, and the song won't collapse, and that's really what I search for when I'm finding songs to reimagine. How malleable are they, and how recognizable are they?
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's great insight, because I guess you don't really think about that when you hear a song. You think, oh, everybody knows this, but like you said, underlying, it's how fleshed out it is. And that's, like I pointed out, like hip hop and a lot of modern pop isn't necessarily the most complex these days. And I guess, so you've shown that you're a big fan of all types of genres, that you've shown like in your music and your remixes and everything. I guess jazz in its current state, how do you see that kind of affecting jazz and its role in popular music like nowadays?
That's a great point. I think jazz is making a big comeback these days with younger generation, largely due to streaming, which I think is awesome, as well as continuing to collaborate with hip hop artists, which has been part of the jazz lineage and the hip hop lineage since the beginning. I mean, Kendrick Lamar, To Pimp a Butterfly is an amazing album, but I hope people listening that like that album also go back to the 90s and look at what Branford Marsalis was doing with Buckshot LaFunk. And, there's decades of that tradition already here. It's not groundbreaking in a sense that jazz and hip hop are together, right? That's a media narrative that people are playing on, but it's really been here forever. So I think that continually reinventing itself in new ways with new artists is key to that for sure. Um, I hope one thing that's a little bit of concern to me is that a bunch of modern jazz is sounding too produced these
Mm.
days, and it's really missing all the risk taking. It's missing the spontaneity, and it's missing, it's a minor nine chord just because there's a more complex harmony doesn't make something jazz.
Mm.
Like actually a lot of it comes down to rhythm more than the harmony, in my opinion. And I think if you ask most jazz musicians, they would say rhythm is much more important than harmony. So I just hope that the jazz artists that are crossing over, like myself and others that are much more popular than I, really think about that and think about like the responsibility of not watering down what makes this music what it is in the first place. Just to, what I'm saying is, I incorporate tons of elements in my music. My
Yeah.
goal is to do that, but my goal is to also not lose the thing that makes it jazz, because at that point I'm just playing instrumental hip hop or instrumental R&B, or I'm
True.
playing another genre really
Yeah.
just on the saxophone. So I hope that listeners are kind of aware of that sort of thing, and also that artists are thinking about that, because I think it is possible to balance both. Not everyone will like it. Plenty of people will think my cover of No Church in the Wild is way too intense and way too edgy for them. That's fine. But that's kind of the balance I'm talking about. Like, we didn't just play a cover of a Jay-Z song and mellow out and chill, right? Like,
Yeah.
we tried to get really creative with it and took a ton of risks, and really, like, we're down to fall flat on our face to make that magic happen. And that's something that I wish was happening more, and moving less away. I hope there's less and less of like this super produced jazz stuff in the future, because it just, it's just, I don't know, like overdubs and all that sort of thing. Unless it's electronic, that's a little different. But
Yeah.
if it's being billed, if you're saying it's acoustic jazz, and then it's just very safe, it's like, what's the point? That, to me at least.
Yeah. I mean, especially like from this generation, the younger generations, I guess jazz can feel like such an intimidating thing for people to approach. But I
Yeah.
also think that like your project, after listening through it a few times, is I think it's what it manages to do is it keeps that kind of jazz tradition while still being easily accessible for people who aren't necessarily, you know, knowledgeable about jazz and the music itself.
Thank you. Yeah, that's been the goal. That's always been the goal. Just to kind of, build a little bit of a bridge there without going too far in either direction, I guess, if
Yeah.
that makes sense. Because I always loved the jazz tradition, always will, always have, but I'm also getting bored of, playing the old songs all the time. So that's why I search for the standards of my generation to reimagine. I think that's really important to do as a jazz artist. I mean, that's what Miles Davis was doing 50 years ago. He was taking the pop songs of his generation and playing them in his
Mm.
own way. So that is part of the jazz tradition that I'm always interested in exploring and upholding and reinventing in my own way.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely seen jazz making a comeback. Like you said, like I've seen the interest in it growing, especially in the younger generations. And there's a lot of jazz artists crossing over, but then there's also a lot of pop artists that are crossing back the other way. Like for me, for example, like there's Jacob Collier, who was nominated for, I think, best album this year. Then there's also artists like King Cruel who have that jazz background. Are there any particular artists that cross back the other way that you are a big fan of?
When you say cross back the other way, you mean from outside of jazz into jazz?
Yeah, like, well, approach it from a pop sensibility, but then incorporate, a lot of jazz elements into their pop music.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, Jacob Collier is definitely one for sure. Um, I would say, um, yeah, to me, he's probably like he's like the number one guy I could think of in that realm.
Yeah.
Because I hear jazz in his music very compositionally. It's like it's at like the foundation of his compositional
Yeah.
practice, even if there's not an improvisation. Um, a lot of times when I hear jazz in a popular context, it's just like it's just a little bit more complex harmony, which for me isn't enough to really consider, just because there's, for example, there's great Motown music or soul music that has complex harmony, and it's straight up R&B just with great harmony. That doesn't necessarily mean it's jazz influence to me.
Yeah.
But Jacob Collier is definitely one that I'm constantly amazed by. I saw him at the North Sea Jazz Fest, and the amount of genres he put into one show was
Yeah.
just like, it's ridiculous. It's really something. Yeah, I'm excited to see how he continues to build. And funny enough, I was just reading about him the other day. I didn't realize that we're almost the same age. I always thought he was younger than me, but he's like 1 year younger than me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hey, well, I think if he wins, if he manages to win somehow this best album, I think that's a great sign for jazz in the future for sure. I think more people will kind of see what he's doing.
Yeah, I hope so too. I really hope he wins. I think this kind of reminds me about like Esperanza Spalding winning Best New Artist like 10 years ago. And that was a big deal when she won, because I think she was the first ever jazz artist to win Best New Artist. Whereas Jacob Collier, he does a little bit of everything. I wouldn't say he's solely a jazz artist, but he definitely, has that as a huge part of what he does. And I don't see that leaving him anytime in the future. But I hope he wins, because I think, like, as far as Best New Artist, pound for pound, like musicality and talent and skill, he's like at the top. Really.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to say.
It's an amazing guy.
Yeah. All right, and I guess out of this whole project, Law of Attraction, again, that's available, I think, everywhere. Is there any particular song that stands out to you the most? That's your favorite?
That's my favorite. That's a great question. It's hard to pick a favorite. I would say one that I think is a little bit overlooked maybe is, well, there's two. I have to pick one for alto and one for tenor. But Squeaky Wheel, which I have two takes of on, yeah, that's on alto, and that's a composition I'm really proud of. It's about persistence. Squeaky Wheel gets the grease. It's definitely more experimental, and it's experimental, and it's also, I think, the culmination of a certain sound I was reaching for a long time, still reaching for a little bit. And on tenor, Feel the Burn, which was written for Bernie Sanders. And that's a challenging song because it's in a weird time signature called 15/8. So like chopping off an eighth note early and getting to the downbeat of an eighth note early. But it's a blues. It's like a funk blues, just in 15/8 with like a 4-bar melody. So it's like a weird tune, but it's really fun to play. I think those two are probably my favorites on the whole album. But I don't know. I've never been one to pick favorites. I always have a hard time picking a favorite in anything. Yeah.
All right, and I guess for the future, how has Spain kind of affected, the way you approach jazz, the way you approach music, your whole experience there since this, you did go to Spain after this one was recorded? Has it affected you in any way and changed the way you look at music or the way you looked at any of your past music?
Oh yeah, totally did. Prior to Spain, I had basically no experience in the studio. I had, as far as engineering, strictly from a sound perspective, my ears were not that good. There's a whole level of listening to music beyond the actual music that has to do with frequencies and vibrations, and that's what sound engineers are doing. And part of my degree there was not a jazz degree; it was contemporary music and music production. So there's a lot of time in the studio. I got a lot better at understanding how sound works and how to mix and how to record. So that changed my whole process. And I also got exposed to a lot of styles of music from around the world while I was there. And I recorded an album that's jazz fusion from a global perspective while I was there, challenging myself to compose music that in a single song incorporated multiple styles from around the world while at the same time keeping the core concepts of hard-hitting New York jazz, spontaneity and risk. in there. So I might have a song where there's some Brazilian influence and some Peruvian influence and some American folk influence all at the same time, and some Spanish rhythm influence. But at the same time, we're still taking risks with it, like a jazz musician would, not not necessarily marrying myself into the rules of any of those styles, just using their sounds compositionally and from a producer's angle. And just as a life experience too, it really changed me because I grew up in New England, and you know, type A and like fast life and all that stuff, like go
Yeah.
go go all the time. And Spain is the complete opposite of that.
Take
It
it
was my
easy out there,
first,
you know?
yeah, it's super chill, and like, there's no winter really, and it's just a beautiful time. So I definitely came back from that with a whole different outlook on life, as far as like work life balance and like what I want out of life, and where do I want to even live. Like now I can't handle the winter anymore. It took all the New Englander out of me. Almost all of it.
You got a taste of the good life, you know?
Yeah, I got a taste of the good life, man. It really was an incredible time, and I miss it dearly. And it was also right. I got back, 6 months before COVID hit, so it was like a huge life shift just coming back from there, going straight to New York, and then COVID hitting, and now I'm inside all the time. So definitely thinking about visiting as soon as it's safe to.
Yeah. I guess how does the culture, like jazz culture, compare in Spain versus the U.S.?
It's a very different. I would say, I was really surprised. I did some touring around Spain and France. I was surprised at how much um, people really value the music. I mean, I've always heard that from teachers of mine and peers when they tour internationally, that jazz is appreciated far more overseas. And
Yeah.
I got a first-hand look at that, and it's really something else. Like they love it and they respect it in a way that I still am trying to wrap my head around. And they have a open-mindedness about it that encompasses, I think, every style of jazz too. They don't in the US, I think American audiences tend to, they don't necessarily want to be challenged as much. I hate to say it like that. Um, but people, I don't know. I just think in the US, people think of jazz as one of five things, and if you don't fit into one of those five things, then people kind of don't know what to. They don't really know how to react.
Mm.
And also, there's less of like, I don't know, in Europe, like you can do a jazz show in a rock club, in a standing room rock club, and people will be like screaming,
Yeah.
And in the US, you can do that a little bit. There are some artists that do that, and that's what I'm hoping to reach for, because it's a lot more fun for me to play to a standing room than a sit down. But there's a lot less of it here, and I think jazz has become a very safe thing here, in that like a lot of the times where you're playing in like a concert hall, or something like that. Whereas overseas, there's more jazz clubs, there's more in between venues where you can be the one jazz artist that month in this venue, and the people that are going to come there are people that listen to everything. And not to say that people that go to a concert hall don't listen to everything, but there's just it's a whole different taste for it over there. Like I would play a concert hall and get a crazy response, and also play like a tiny rock club in Barcelona where people are like yelling at me, like screaming, like as if I'm like American, what's that boy band, like as if it was like a boy band show or something.
Yeah.
I'm like, what is this? I've never had this before. So there's a different energy around it that was great. There are a lot of great jazz musicians in Spain too. Spain has a long tradition of jazz, actually. So it was great to meet some musicians there and collaborate. And I can't wait to get back. I miss it a lot.
I mean, it sounds awesome. I'm sure it also had to feel really good to have your music appreciated in such a way.
Yeah, it definitely does. And it's interesting seeing like in different cities and different areas how it's changed. Like in Spain, you'll be playing to the Spanish audience, and like they'll be so quiet because they're being so respectful, that while you're on stage, you won't always necessarily get a vibe on if they like it, and then after they're like, wow, I loved it. Like more so than, than other places maybe. Whereas in the US, like, you generally have a sense throughout the show, like, okay, are people digging this or not? Because
Yeah.
yeah, you just get a vibe from the crowd during the show. Whereas in France, it's like that, but definitely more of a vibe from the crowd, and they're really really into it. They'll be yelling and screaming. Like, I think in the US, Philadelphia is one of my favorite places to play because you'll get people they're not afraid to yell during the show
Mm.
if they like something, whereas
Yeah.
in other places it sometimes is a little bit too quiet, and you're getting the golf clap.
Well, Philadelphia has never been accused of being too quiet.
Exactly. Yeah, I love playing in Philly. There's just a whole energy here, and a long-standing jazz tradition.
Awesome. Well, I guess what are your plans to keep rolling this out? How do you plan on promoting this, and where can people find, the music, find you, find everything?
Sure. So my website is mikecaseyjazz.com, and that's Casey with a C. And on the website, I have signed CDs and merch for the album, as well as some limited vinyl copies that are coming. And in 2021, I'm actually releasing remixes of the Love Attraction, as well as some
Okay.
extra songs from that session that we got takes of that I'm really happy with. So it was a lot of music. I think by the time I'm finished with all of it, it's like 27 songs from 2 days in the studio. And I still have footage for that stuff too. So there'll be like another like extras Law of Attraction visual album coming out sometime
Awesome.
next year to keep the story going.
Cool. Well, people should definitely follow you. Stay tuned because there's a lot of music coming from you, a lot of great music. And we will have this up, on the website, on YouTube, everywhere. We'll have all his details in the description. So definitely give him a follow. Check him out. The album was great, and I appreciate you taking time out to talk to us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Dario. It was great to connect, and happy holidays to you and your family.
Yeah, same to you, and we'll catch up soon.
All right. Take care. Stay
All right.
safe.
Bye.
Bye bye.